Hello, welcome to Old Saw, where I, JD Adler, am going to be telling you stories, old stories, fables, myths, that kind of thing, specifically from this collection of Grimm's fairy tales, right here, put together by Jack Zipes. He claims the most complete collection and the truest translation, because it stays true to the idioms and the character of the language of the time. I'll leave it up to the audience to decide whether he accomplishes that mission. This is the collection I'm going to be reusing as I read each of these stories, one per episode. There's 242 stories in there. This week, the story we are doing is called The Virgin Mary's Child. Now obviously the Virgin Mary is a character in Christian mythology. This is not a story I am familiar with having ever heard before as part of Christian lore, probably because it's so insane. It is a completely insane tale. I don't know if they invented it themselves or if it was something that was being passed around at the time and they just codified. It is one of the most insane stories I have ever read or heard. Is not, as far as I know, the powers ascribed to the Virgin Mary in this story are not traditionally considered within her ability set. Nonetheless, here we go. This is part of the Grimm's fairy tale collection. This is story number 3. The complete fairy tales of the brothers Grimm, as collected by Mr. Zipes. And now, of course, I just lost my page while doing that, but it's only story number 3, so it shouldn't take me long to find it. Here we go, Virgin Mary's Child. Bada bing, bada boom. This is the Virgin Mary's Child. I'm starting right in, going right into it. You ready? Are you ready? Are you prepared? Sit. Okay, here we go. A poor woodcutter and his wife. Poor woodcutter and his wife lived at the edge of a large forest, and their only child was a little girl who was 3 years old. They were so poor they could not have daily meals anymore, and did not know how they would provide food for their daughter. One morning, the woodcutter, who was distressed by all this, went into the forest to work. As he began chopping wood, a tall, beautiful woman suddenly appeared before him. She was wearing a crown of shining stars on her head and said to him, "I am the Virgin Mary, Mother of the Christ child. Since you are poor and needy, bring me your child. I'll take her with me and be her mother and look after her." And the woodcutter obeyed her. That's it. That's the next sentence. The woodcutter obeyed her. That was it. That was all the development, the convincing he needed was this random shiny chick that he saw in the forest while, deprived of food himself. He was ready to go. All right, so that's the next sentence. The woodcutter obeyed her. He brought his child and gave her to the Virgin Mary, who took her up to heaven. Everything went well for the girl there. Everything went well for the girl there. She ate cake and drank sweet milk. Her clothes were made of gold, and the little angels played with her. Oh, that's so sad. That's how many dead children there are in heaven. They got play dates and stuff. One day, when she turned 14, so you're still aging in heaven apparently. When she turned 14, the Virgin Mary summoned her and said, "Dear child, I intend to go on a long journey, and I want you to take care of the keys to the 13 doors of the kingdom of heaven." There are so many logistical questions I have about all of that sentence, but we'll come back to that later. You may open 12 of the doors and look at all the marvelous things inside, but I forbid you to open the 13th door that this little key unlocks. Be on your guard and don't open it. If you do, you'll be unhappy. This is the most traditional Abrahamic religion trap. Here's the thing, but don't do it. Pandora, Eve, this is how they get everybody. Why do they keep doing this? And why do people be... It's so mean. Here's some bacon, but don't eat it. The maiden promised to be obedient. And when the Virgin Mary had departed, she began to explore the rooms of the kingdom of heaven. Every day she opened a new room until she had unlocked 12 of them. In each one there was an apostle in dazzling light, and she was delighted by the glory and splendor, and the little angels who always accompanied her were delighted too. Now the forbidden door was the only one left. Dun, dun, dun. And she felt a great desire to know what was inside, and she said to the little angels, I won't open it all the way, and I won't go inside. I'll only unlock it so we can peek through a little crack. Oh no, said the other angels. That would be a sin. The Virgin Mary's forbidden it, and something awful could happen to you. So the maiden said nothing more about this, but she could not still the urge in her heart. Her desire kept gnawing and pecking away at her and gave her no peace. One day, when the angels had all gone out. Okay, what does that mean when the angels had all... Are they clubbing? Are the angels out clubbing? When the angels had all gone out. Where do all... Anyway, one day, when the angels had all gone out, she thought, now I'm all alone and can take a peek. No one will know if I do. So, she looked for the key, and when she got it in her hand, she put in the lock and turned it. Suddenly the door sprang open, and there she saw the Holy Trinity stirring in fire and splendor. I mean, that's amazing. That's amazing. But why and how is it locked? So God, how Holy Trinity is God, right? Is the Catholic name for God. He's locked behind a door that Mary has entrusted. Anyway, she stood still. She stood still for a while and looked at everything in amazement. Yeah, I bet. Then she touched the light just a little with her finger, and the finger turned golden. All at once, she was overcome by a tremendous fear, and she slammed the door and ran away. The fear would not abate. No matter what she did, her heart pounded constantly and could not be calmed. Moreover, the gold stayed on her finger and would not go away, even though she washed and rubbed it as much as she could. Soon after, the Virgin Mary returned from her journey. She summoned the maiden and asked her to return the keys of heaven to her. When the maiden handed her the bunch of keys, the Virgin looked into her eyes. Did you also open the 13th door? No, she answered. Then the Virgin Mary put her hand on the maiden's heart and could feel it pounding and pounding. Now she knew the maiden had disobeyed her command and had opened the door. Once again she asked, you opened the door, didn't you? No, said the maiden for a second time. When the Virgin Mary glanced at her finger that had become gold from touching the heavenly fire, she knew the maiden had sinned. Didn't you? She asked for a third time. No, the maiden replied, for a third time. Then the Virgin Mary said, you've disobeyed me, and you've even lied. You are no longer worthy to stay in heaven. Which I did not know was a thing. Okay. The maiden sank then into a deep sleep. And when she awoke, so just to be clear, the Virgin Mary gets to decide who stays and goes from heaven. And she's also got God locked behind a door. And the apostles. On occasion, she goes on mysterious journeys like a character. They got a character in an adventure series. This week on NBC, Virgin Mary, angel, avenging angel. The maiden sank then into a deep sleep, and when she awoke, she was lying on earth in the middle of a wilderness. She wanted to cry out, but she could not utter a sound. She jumped up and wanted to run away, but wherever she turned, she encountered thick hedges of thorns and could not make her way through them. She was imprisoned in this desolate spot and had to make an old hollow tree her dwelling place. When night came, she crawled inside and fell asleep. If it rained and there was stormy weather, she found shelter there. But it was a miserable life, and whenever she thought about how beautiful it had been in heaven and how the angels had played with her, she shed bitter tears. Robots, roots and wild berries were her only food, and she went out looking for them as far as she could walk. In the fall, she gathered the nuts and leaves that fell to the ground and carried them into the hollow tree. The nuts were her food in the winter, and when snow and ice came, she crawled into the leaves like a poor little animal so that she would not freeze. Before long, her clothes became tattered, and one piece after another fell off her body. As soon as the sun began to shine again, she went out and sat in front of the tree. Her long hair covered her on all sides like a cloak. She spent year after year like this and felt the sorrow and misery of the world. One day when the trees were fresh and green again, the king of the country came to hunt in the forest and began chasing a deer. When it fled into the bushes that surrounded the maiden's dwelling spot in the forest, he got off his horse, pulled the bushes apart, and cut a path for himself with his sword. When he finally got through, he saw a wonderful-looking maiden sitting under a tree, and her golden hair covered her down to her toes. He stood still and gazed at her full of amazement. Then he addressed her and said, "Who are you, and why are you sitting in this desolate spot?" However, she did not answer, because she could not open her mouth. So the king continued to speak. "Would you like to come back to my castle with me?" She nodded her head, just a little. Then the king took her in his arms, carried her to his horse, and rode home with her. When he reached the royal castle, he had her dressed in beautiful garments and gave her plenty of everything. Even though she could not speak, she was so sweet and beautiful that he fell in love with her. And it was not long before he married her. When about a year had passed, the queen gave birth to a son. Immediately following this, in the night she lay alone in bed, the Virgin Mary appears before her and says, "If you will tell me the truth and confess that you unlocked the forbidden door, I'll open your mouth and give you back the power of speech. If you persist in your sin and stubbornly deny it, I shall take your newborn baby away with me." What the fuck, Mary? Why is Mary such an evil bitch? The queen was given the power to answer, but she remained stubborn and said, "No, I didn't open the forbidden door." Why? Why? What is your benefit at this point from lying? So the Virgin Mary, I guess, stick with your lie, right? Stick with that lie. Never give up the lie. So the Virgin Mary took the newborn baby out of her arms and disappeared with him. The next morning, when the child could not be found, a rumor began circulating among the people that the queen was an ogress and had killed her own child. Not entirely false. She heard all this, but could do nothing to deny it. However, the king refused to believe it because he loved her so much. After a year had passed, the queen gave birth to another son. Once more, the Virgin Mary comes to her and says, "If you'll confess that you opened the forbidden door, I'll give you back your child and loosen your tongue. But if you persist in your sin and deny it, I'll take this newborn away with me too." So those are the stakes right now. The stakes are, you can have the child I took back. You can have your ability to speak back. But if you lie, if you stick by your lie, I'm going to take the new child with me as well and keep those two bad things that previously happened. All she has to do is admit that she lied, is what she's being told. Once again, the queen says, "No, I didn't open the forbidden door." Why? Why does she say that? What is her benefit from lying? I don't understand. The brothers Grimm are not available for comment, so we'll never know. And woe is me. So the Virgin Mary took the child out of her arms and went away with him to heaven. The next morning, when this baby had also vanished, the people said quite openly that the queen had devoured it. Not just killed it, devoured it. And the king's counselors demanded that she be executed. However, the king loved her so much that he would not believe it and ordered his counselors to stop talking about it on pain of death. Following year, the queen gave birth to a beautiful little daughter. And at night, the Virgin Mary appears before her for the third time and said, "Follow me." She took her by the hand and led her to heaven, where she showed her how her two eldest children were laughing and playing with a globe of the earth. When the queen expressed her delight, the Virgin Mary asked, "Hasn't your heart softened yet? If you'll confess that you opened the forbidden door, I'll give you back your two little sons." But the queen answered for the third time, "No, I didn't open the door." Then the Virgin Mary let her sink down to earth again and took away her third child too. The next morning, when it became known, everyone cried out openly, "The queen is an ogress. She must be sentenced to death." The king could no longer restrain his counselors, and the queen was brought to trial. Since she could not answer or defend herself, she was condemned to die at the stake. By the way, a side note here, just a little bit ableist, Grimm. Could have given her a pen and paper. But anyway, the wood was gathered, and when she was bound to the stake and the fire began to burn all around her, the hard ice on her pride melted, and her heart was moved by repentance. "If only I could confess before I die that I opened the door," she thought. Suddenly her voice came back, and she cried aloud, "Yes, Mary, I did it." All at once rain poured down from the sky and put out the flames. A light erupted above her, and the Virgin Mary descended with two little sons at either side and the newborn daughter in her arms. And she said to the queen kindly, "Those who repent their sins and confess will be forgiven." Then she handed the queen her three children, loosened her tongue, and bestowed happiness on her for the rest of her life. And that's how the story ends. That is the Brother Grimm version of a happy ending. That is a twisted, sick. That is sick. Mary is a sick individual in this story. The way she tortures these people, and what is wrong with this woman? Why was she holding out? And, whew. And then you get to live happily ever after. The trauma that these kids and the king and what? And when did Mary become a witch? That could actually, like, or she's death? Is she death in this story? And like Mary is seriously, she's like a demigoddess. Like she's like a Athena or shit in this story. It is crazy. This is one of the craziest stories about Christendom I have ever heard. And there's some crazy ones out there. But this is, and the fact that that's supposed to be a happy ending. And now she's supposed to be queen over all these subjects who just tried to murder her. But actually, and then she can't defend herself because she can't talk. Like that alone, there's so many things that are like, telling on yourself is the phrase. They're just telling themselves so much in this story. It is so crazy. But that is the thing about, like, when 1,000 years, when they're reading the stories from our era, the ways in which, the unconscious ways, when they talk about unconscious prejudice and that you reveal in your stories when you're doing this. And he talks about this woman, and then they're in heaven and the kids are happy. And she was miserable when she got kicked out of heaven, maybe. And then they're like, and so why was it better? Everything. So that's the story of the Virgin Mary and the maiden. What was the proper? It's just titled the Virgin Mary, I think. Or the Virgin Mary's Child. None of that was the Virgin Mary's Child. Why was it titled that? And where, as far as construction goes, there's the point where Mary goes on a journey. And that's the thing that sort of vagueness to just is something we don't normally do in modern storytelling, where we want the audience to have the details. We don't want them to be able to ask us a question and not, or have a question in their mind that they don't know the answer to. But she just went on a drink. Man, she went on a drink, doesn't matter where she went. Don't worry about that. Don't you worry about what doesn't concern you, huh? That's not part of your story. This is the story you need to be focused on, huh? Anyway, so that's Mary. That's the Virgin Mary's Child story. That's episode 3. Probably gonna edit a bunch of that out, but that's episode 3. Next time, come back to us. We're gonna do a tale about the boy who went forth to learn what fear was. That sounds intriguing, doesn't it? A tale about the boy who went forth to learn what fear was. Grimm's Fairy Tales. Good times. Brothers Grimm. Totally healthy guys, psychologically.